¿Es una camioneta naranja oscuro 1993? ¿O es un...
Of the comments on the movie's YouTube channel says, one of the comments of the YouTube channel says, this trailer went from 1995's A Goofy Movie to Age of Ultron in seconds.
Okay.
And oh my God, they are so right, because how did you and your team manage that? On one hand, the lovely story, the lovely family story, and on the other hand, the robot apocalypse. Was it from the beginning with the script or on the go while editing the film?
No, that was definitely always the idea. It was always like, okay, how do we sort of maybe sort of like a big disaster like this will sort of bring out it'll bring all these sort of issues to the surface, and sort of like technology sort of like as a stand-in for kind of the generational divide. So that was always like from the beginning. But you're not wrong that it was very difficult to balance those two tones, because, on one hand, you want to tell a really human, relatable story. But on the other hand, we have all this like fun, goofy, weird stuff that we're doing too. And it was a really balance, because, in early versions of the movie, it was sort of like, oh, this isn't working. And we would just tighten the screws and sort of just sharpen each scene to sort of, and you would watch it, and you'd watch it with an audience, and they will sort of, you don't even have to hear what they say. You could just feel like, oh, this isn't working, or wow, this is like going off like gangbusters. We should have more of this in the movie. So it was really through trial and error that we ended up like that movie makes sense.
My second question is probably the most important of all. Why Furby? Because you could take the easy way and create some random menacing toy, but the fact that it's Furby, it's poetic cinema for me.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's because it's so relatable and it's so instantly recognizable. And I do think, when I was a kid, I was afraid of the Furby, I both loved it because it was like, cooing at me and stuff. But also, like, when I put it in the closet, I was like, this thing's supposed to be off, and it's still making noises. So this movie is like therapy for me, and I am working out those feelings.
And who had the idea of adding voice and the things that it said, that the Furby said?
That was sort of me and Jeff Rowe, my co-writer and co-director. We sort of like worked on that scene together a lot. And I do the voice.
Okay.
You're welcome. No, but I do the voice. And it just sort of came from trying to make each other laugh. I mean, I think that's sort of where a lot of the movie comes from, is just me and Jeff, and later me and the story team and the whole crew, like just trying to make each other laugh. And because I really do think that you never want anything to feel like, well, that's okay for kids, but I don't like it. It's sort of like me as a man-child should like everything in the movie. Which I try to sort of like put my head in, put your sort of adult cap on, and then sort of also put your like kid cap on and say like, all right, does this feel like it would work for anybody? And I do think that since we're so immature, if it makes us laugh, it will probably make a child laugh.
Soy Katie. Soy un poco rara. Mis papás no han logrado entenderme. A decir verdad, yo también tardé un rato en entenderme.
On a tweet by Chris Miller, he wrote that the world of Olivia Colman's Paul has a totally different palette and is much cleaner and looks like a Journey album cover. What references you had for this world? Because that imagery reminds me also some Joseph Kosinski's high-tech movies like Tron Legacy and Oblivion.
Yeah, no, basically, that set is really interesting because we did a version, I learned sort of like a lesson in directing and sort of finding out what you could get from your artists with that background, because the artist did a version of it and it was great, but I was like, And I'd never given this note before because I always felt like, well, if you give a note, you have to have a reason behind it. And I just said, like, I was just sort of like bowed my head and I was like, this isn't a good note, but it just needs to be like 1,000 times cooler. How do you make it way cooler? And then the artist, Yashar Kasai, who's incredible, was like, all right, okay. all right. And he just did it. And then it was amazing. And he was like pulling in inspiration from like, we were like looking at Kubrick movies and we were looking at artists and you know, his own work is really like that. So we were trying to, and another thing is like, we were trying to like pull from this, you know, these James Turrell installations that are really colorful and spare and minimalist. So we were trying to, you know, work all that stuff together in a studio to make something that you'd never seen before, hopefully.
Other YouTube commentary mentioned on 2017, Sony Animation was like, hey, look how cool are the emojis on your phone. And now on 2020, Sony Animation is like, no, your phone is actually evil. But I think that I loved about this movie is that it's not about the technology is bad, because Katie used her phone or laptop to express herself.
Yeah.
Can you expand on that?
You know, I think that technology has so much potential for good, and we wanted to show that in the movie too, because it's like, I grew up with Microsoft or Macromedia Flash. Like, I learned to animate using computers. I learned to talk to other animators using computers. Like, I've seen the tremendous value that technology has brought to my life, and I can see, you know, in the pandemic, I'm calling my parents and stuff like that. Like, there's so much good stuff about it, but also at the same time, you know, there's these like, you know, there's infinite opportunities for things to go wrong and for people to be pulled away from each other into technology and for tech companies to sort of monetize your attention. So, and your, you know, mesh themselves into your life. So we're trying to find, you know, to show in this movie in a non-preachy way, like, here's what's good about it, here's what's bad about it. You can sort of draw your own conclusions. And not be preachy, because I have found that, like, if you are preachy, people will hate you for it.
Yeah.
People hated the movie without seeing it, thinking it was going to say phones were bad. You know, they were like, this movie, you know, but I understand why. I understand why, because it's like, nobody likes being talked down to.
¿No ven? Esto es bueno, es algo natural.
In an interview, you mentioned that you were a real big overwriter, that all your scripts on Gravity Falls were long and always wanted to hang on to every joke. But
Yes.
One thing that you learned from Alex Hirsch was that if some story in your script was not an important part of the story or 10 out of 10 joke, then you have to cut it. So
Yeah.
how was the process with this script? Because one thing is a 22-minute episode, and the other thing is you could use probably. You could have the Irishman animation, no?
There were long cuts. No, and it's funny, Alex wasn't here to stop me, so I put in all the jokes. No, but it was, but that is really true in that it's, and you know, Jeff, my co-writer and co-director, was the person who kept me honest about that stuff. Jeff Rowe, he was really great, and he was sort of able to, you know, sort of help me, because I wanted to leave everything in. I'm like, no, they're all my babies, you know. And he's like, this baby's got to die. Nobody likes this baby. And it's super true. And eventually, I was able to let some of that stuff go, because, and it's like, the thing that was nice that we never got in Gravity Falls is we got to show it to an audience a bunch of times. And you would really see, you were like, it was like taking your babies to college. You know, you were sort of like, you'd take them out and you're like, oh, wow, that guy flunked out in his first year. Holy moly, let's get that guy out of the movie. You know, another one's like, oh, he's got a PhD. People like that joke. But that was a weird analogy, but you get it.
Yeah. The movie has a lot of details, jokes that some of them, if you blink, you'll miss them. Can you talk about one or two you're really proud of, and maybe we have to pause the movie to appreciate it?
Yeah, somewhere in the movie, if you pause it, you can see Katie. You can see Katie's alternate titles for a potential sequel, which I think are funny, and also might be cool movies. And then also, if you pause, there's like there's whole scenes of like robot language that if you decode, they all say something. So there's, if you really want to get deep, because I was a nerd when I was a kid, and I was like, "Ooh, I want to know all the secrets." Like I decoded a language when I was a kid if it meant I could read another funny joke.
Well, thank you very much, Mike, and good luck.
Thank you, appreciate it.